I've lost a big folder with my social security.
What is that, a shaver?
Here's my shaver, yeah. That's where I was cleaning up.
Okay,
everybody.
I'm standing.
Everybody ready? Okay.
The queen is here.
The queen is
Is everybody ready? All right, let's go. So, if everybody out there could please join us for the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. All right. Roll call, please.
Please note for the record, all council members are present.
Okay. Oral communications. Wait, I do have a slip. Is Anya here, Ray? Or is that an old
Where
one?
that came from? Yeah, that must be old.
It is say NOP, so,
That must be old,
Notice
yeah.
of preparation, that was last.
That was
Yeah.
last meeting, yeah.
but that could be an oral communication item for tonight.
It could have been, yeah, but it's not.
All right, so since we don't have anyone out there in the audience tonight, I guess we'll move on to adoption of tonight's agenda.
unless you want to wait for somebody.
No, Betsy's laughing because she goes, man, we're going into the agenda and doing it before 8:30.
Yeah.
Move approval agenda.
Okay.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so tonight, in our ongoing efforts to come up with the best budget possible for the citizens of Brisbane, we have a workshop tonight. So, Stuart, you're the man.
Thank you. So, for preparing for tonight's meeting, I was trying to figure out how to conceptualize this. So the first thing I thought I should do is recap where we've been. So for the 2012-2013 budget process that we had finished, what seems like yesterday, but it was almost 6 months ago, we had the council subcommittee met to determine program categories that were out there were most important and valuable. Council reviewed these categories and agreed upon the definitions and programs, and then defined what wins went into the must category. Too many. Council reviewed the budget, eliminated about $120,000 from the budget last fiscal year, and developed a list of future items. On that list of future items was the capital improvement program. Council has already toured the water and sewer facilities, and we anticipate bringing that back to the full capital improvement program back to you in the future. You looked at the marina maintenance and funding, and you had a discussion of that on September 12th. You looked at the impact of separating the marina from the Parks and Recreation Department, and you talked about that on September 12th. The successor agency separation, and you discussed that on September 12th. It was a very busy night. We talked about water and sewer rates on October 1st. You looked at potential new revenue. You adopted the Recology business license on October 15th, and you discussed the tank farm business license on October 15th as well. On November 5th, you looked at an increased swimming pool fees, which comes under the idea of Parks and Recreation Program review, including fees, and the Parks and Recreation Commission is still going through that process. You looked at updated organization and classifications, and you did that tonight. And there are still some items that need to be brought forward. The analysis of looking at the number of ball fields that we maintain. I will tell you the Parks and Recreation Commission, probably because I haven't brought it to them yet, has not looked at it. The fire station status options, that's still something out there. Economic Development Program. I know the Economic Development Subcommittee has been meeting assiduously over the past few months to try and bring something back to the full council. And then there was the conversation about the analysis of total contribution to the schools. And whenever we have a free moment on the calendar, we can bring that back as well. Anyway, to continue on, the We adopted a budget, or you adopted a budget using slightly less than $1 million of fund balance, or right around $1 million in fund balance. Since that time, you approved contracts with reductions in pay and no increase in health insurance for the calendar year of, it should have said 2013. I apologize for that. Since that time, we've had some new financial information. As you know, things keep moving forward. We actually ended fiscal year 11-12 with about a $1.7 million surplus, which is very good. I've given you details on that line item by line item, but the big issues out there were we got extra money for from redevelopment. We had about $400,000 in savings above and beyond what was anticipated. We had. I don't have my cheat sheet in front of me. I apologize for that, but I gave it to you in detail line items.
Extra money from Recology, right?
Not last year.
For 2012. Okay.
That's fiscal year 2012-2013,
Oh, okay.
where we're going to get extra money.
Oh, okay.
And so FYA 2011-2012, we're going to end with the fund balance between $8 and $9 million. And I give you a very wide range in that because you know me, I'm a conservative person. Until we get the audited numbers, I'm not going to. I don't want to be pinned down to a particular number. But I can assure you, by giving you that wide of a range, I'll bet you I'll be in the upper end of that range and then the lower end of that range.
Just for the heck of it, would you define fund balance?
Fund balance is the amount of money the general fund has left over at the end of the year in savings in total for all the years it's ever been in existence.
So it's an accumulation, and it's just the general fund balance?
This is just the general fund balance, yes.
Okay.
But all funds have fund balances.
All funds have either positive or negative fund balances. Enterprise funds have what's called retained earning, which does the same thing. And as we've talked about in the past with the water and sewer fund, they have a negative retained earning because of their large unfunded depreciation. Going on with new financial information for fiscal year 12-13, Council approved a $2.1 million business license for Recology instead of the projected $1,050,000. We have an additional $400,000 coming from the RDA dissolution than we had anticipated. So right now, I'm projecting a surplus of about $500,000 for fiscal year 12-13, and that's without any money coming from VWR. VWR is still in town. They are supposed to be in town through some point in December, is what we've got their last layoff notice for. I will not know how much sales tax we get from VWR for the first quarter, July through September, until December 14th at the earliest. And I won't know exactly what we get from VWR at that point, but that's when the Board of Equalization releases the dollar amount that Brisbane gets for that first quarter. And the reason I don't know what to estimate is I'm not quite sure what their business practices are. I don't know if they're still running all their sales out of the Brisbane office. If they are, we can probably anticipate about $500,000 per quarter, because that's what we've gotten in the past. If they're not running all their sales out of the Brisbane office and running them out of another office in Brisbane, another office in the state, then we may be getting zero. If they're running their sales off of someplace out of state that they can't identify, then we would get whatever gets shipped from the Brisbane to whoever they ship to. So it could be anywhere from 0 to 500,000. I will get a better indication on December 14th.
So the $500,000, the money that we would get from VWR for that quarter could be about $500,000.
It could be. I do not know.
I did speak to a current employee there, asked him that very question, and he says that, technically they are, but they're not generating the sales out of there. Is the salespeople are doing it from home, but it's tied to this office.
Right. So therefore, if it's being attributed back to our office, then we will get the money.
Yeah, and all the information that I've ever received, and I've tried to keep VWR here, that was the indication that I got from them, that we would still continue to get the sales tax money until they completely left.
it's also, this is kind of a question, my understanding that, at least initially, maybe it was on appeal, the lawsuit filed by a number of organizations that the EIR on their new place in Visalia was inadequate, and the Court of Appeals agreed, I think. And so that presumably is going to be holding up their building and opening up in Visalia. And of course, we have no idea how long that's going to be or whether they're going to appeal and go to a higher level of court determination. But that could hold up their departure, I'm presuming, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah, and I can't really respond to that, although we are all aware that that lawsuit was successful. But we have received the notice that's required under federal law when a company is closing and leaving, that they have sent a letter to the city indicating that all their personnel will be out of the Brisbane facility by December 31st.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, our sales tax auditor, who does sales tax audit for us, driving through Visalia, saw the building already finished being built.
But they can't occupy it, obviously.
That's probably what the issue is.
It is occupied
Okay.
and is in utter chaos, because there's a lot of new people that just don't even understand the system yet, from what I understand. I think they're trying to get an injunction.
That's my understanding from the Teamsters, was that they were
Right.
That's
seeking
what-
an injunction.
So they're trying to get an injunction to cease operation
Right, to enforce the court decision.
until they address that portion of the EIR to bring it to where it
Right.
is adequate and then recertified.
Right.
And just to think about it, they have a lot of employees. So would the court come and enforce the injunction, knowing at this bad economic times that you're talking about impacting jobs again?
No, I mean, I think the court's going to look at it and say they're impacting jobs either with whatever decision they make. As I say, from a Brisbane perspective, I'm being conservative. I have that $500,000 surplus does not include anything coming from VWR, anything from VWR. We probably should recognize as a one-time
Right.
revenue
That's-
source, because it's going to be a one-time thing for us.
Right.
And Stuart, you said we'll get that information from
Board of
Board of
Equalization.
Equalization. When does that happen?
Well, they release their
First quarter.
their first quarter information. It gets out on their website on December 14th. It then takes, for us to know exactly how our sales tax is broken down, takes a few weeks after that.
But you can figure it out. I mean, you'll see that.
Well, I'll see what the number is, and I'll know what it should have been without VWR and what it is, and I can look at the difference and say, that's probably all VWR. But there could be other businesses that have improved or have lost business. So I won't have an exact number, but I'll know whether or not we're getting a VWR number in there or not.
Gotcha. Okay, December 14th.
Yes,
All right.
I'm eagerly awaiting.
Yeah.
Yeah, if we are, it'd be a significant amount.
Right, that's exactly
Yeah, right.
what
Yeah, that'd be a-
and that's what I would know.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and another question on this same slide. The 400,000
Yes,
from the redevelopment dissolution,
yes,
that amount is a one-time amount, right?
yes,
But there will be some amount that will be coming subsequently every year, right? That
Possibly.
what used to be tax increment that was taken
Possibly.
from
I
the
thought
city
we were gonna
will
get
now be
250.
coming on a regular basis, just like for all the other entities,
correct.
so-called underlying taxing entities.
Correct. So what we had in the budget was $100,000 for an ongoing revenue source, which is separate from the administrative.
It's separate.
Is separate from administrative.
Right.
The 250 was administrative.
Right.
So the 100,000 was an ongoing revenue source. The 100,000 that I had put in the budget last year, it was based on having enough money to meet all of our obligations and then having about $500,000 left over. And I talked about this with the oversight board. The redevelopment agency actually is down in assessment over the past few years. I don't think anything is going to be falling through the waterfall. And I know I went through this whole thing in detail a number of meetings ago.
Right.
So I'd be more happy to go through it again if you want. So this additional 400,000 is assuming we get nothing from the waterfall or from pass-throughs.
Right.
This 400, so my anticipation, and once again, I'm being on the conservative side, is that we just turned over $2.9 million to the county from the low mod housing fund. That $2.9 million is going to be redistributed back to the underlying taxing entities. The county is going through all kinds of machinations to figure out how they should actually do it. But what I can tell you is that we are within the redevelopment area, we get 20% of the property tax generated within the redevelopment and the underlying tax base. So the anticipation that I have is that we should get no less than 20% of the 2.9 million, which actually would be $580,000. So when I say that we're going to get 500,000, I'm just trying to give myself a little bit of fudge factor, so that way if a different revenue source comes in a little bit lower than anticipated, I've got that additional money available. But for all I know, after the county goes through all of its machinations, we may get a little bit more than the 580,000. I don't know, because they're really trying to figure out how many angels dance on the head of the pin, in my opinion, to make it right for everybody. And it's I feel bad for the county controller, or actually the deputy county controller is trying to work through it. She is working many more hours than anybody really should be to try and get that done. But that's why it's 400,000, and I know it's going to be a little bit higher than that, but once again, I don't want to come to you and have worse news. I'd rather come to you with positive news. And as I said, that last year, this year, I think we're doing better than we had anticipated. So, if we end up if we start July 1st of 2012 with somewhere around an $8.5 million fund balance, at the end of 12-13, my anticipation is we'd be at least at $9 million, but that doesn't include any savings that we would anticipate throughout the year, as we had 400,000 last year. My guess is we will have some level of savings this year as well. So I think we're going to be over $9 million when we finish 2012-13, barring any real unexpected circumstances. And and as you know, we approved the Recology, and that's 16% of the overall budget. So I know that revenue source is a firm revenue source. So just to try and put it in perspective, so in 2011-12, projections as of April showed about a $700,000 increase in fund balance. We're, based on the latest numbers that are unaudited, and the auditors were upstairs right up until 7:30 tonight, still working on our audit. We have about a $1.7 million surplus. We had budgeted as of July 1st of $1,080,000 use of fund balance. Right now, I'm reprojecting it to about $530,000. And I walked through all those items on a very detailed sheet for you. So, and if you want, I can walk through it again, but.
No, very thorough.
Okay. So this idea of now that we would have somewhere in the $9 million range fund balance brings a different question to my mind. And this is not a question that I have brought up to you, but I think it's a question that the council has talked about. I think it's a question that I've heard from Councilmember Richardson on a number of occasions, is what should we do with fund balance, and how much is enough fund balance? So 50% of, currently your policy is 50% of expenditures, or $5 million, whichever is less. That was, the $5 million was put in there at the beginning of the recession, knowing that we were going to eat down into fund balance, and that we might get down to $5 million, and in order to preserve the programs we provide to the public. I can say that we've never gotten down to that $5 million. 50% of expenditures would be about $6.3 million for fiscal year 12-13. So therefore, if we end up the year somewhere in the $9 million range, you would be exceeding this current policy for fund balance. So the question that comes to light for me is that we should review what the current fund balance policy, and knowing that we only have a 4-year current commitment from Recology. And how do we deal with fund balance over the next 4 years may be different than we would want to deal with fund balance on an ongoing basis if, in fact, 4 years from now we lose $2 million.
ask a question?
Sure.
Isn't it also part of GASB that your fund balance, you need to show whether it's designated, whether it's committed, undesignated, rather than just leaving it there as fund balance?
Yes. And when we finish the audit, we will show all the different designations.
Right. And the other thing is, correct me if I'm wrong, the good thing that we've been able to have this 50% fund, what they call it, be able to have the reserve has been really about all the staff realignment, all the cost-cutting measures that has taken in the budget to have reduced expense, so you would have less fund balance. If we would have kept the expenses the way it was, we would have not been able to have the 50%. Am I not correct?
Oh, you are correct. I mean, we have, over the last 5+ years, we have eliminated about $2.7 million from expenses through personnel savings. We've also, as you know, we've looked at the budget over and over again. I think the way that Clay describes it is that we've taken a ball and we've kept squeezing and squeezing and squeezing. And right now there's a lot of pressure on that ball. And there's a lot of things that we have not done over the last 5 years that if you had told me we had as much money as we needed, we would have come back to you. There's capital projects that we haven't done. I think the conversation about the marina is a fascinating conversation. When it comes to things that where should we be spending money on that we probably haven't been spending as much. If you look at the water and sewer system, so there's just a number of needs that we have wanted to keep the pressure on until we knew what our new bottom line was.
Right.
I think over the next 4 years, we know what our new bottom line is. I think that I feel comfortable that we're at a base. I think the question is, once we're at this base, what do we do next? Do we look at relieving some of the pressure on some of the departments? Do we look at doing some of our capital items? How do we deal with that? And also, how do we deal with the fund balance? Because given the fact that Recology we may not be receiving $2 million 4 years from now or 5 years from now, do we want to have a higher fund balance? So I was thinking to myself, as I often do, because no one really likes to deal with me when I start thinking off the top of my head, a number of questions that we probably should be looking at for fund balance. No, Betsy's looking there and laughing. Should we use reserves to preserve programs during a recession? And this is what you were talking about, Councilmember Richardson, is that we have used our reserves, and we were probably close to $10 million. We probably ate them down to $6 million. So we went through reserves during the last recession, which hopefully will be the worst recession of my life, but you never know. So the question is, should we use reserves to preserve programs during recession? And if yes, how long should we look to preserve those programs before we start making permanent cuts? The other question would be what's the amount of reserves that you need for an emergency? And how long until you think the emergency will have full recovery? So you look at something like Superstorm Sandy. Not that I think we will have a Superstorm Sandy, but we could have that earthquake. And if we have an earthquake and you lose the use of the 2 hotels in town, that's $1.5 million worth of revenue that we receive every year. If it takes them 2 to 3 years to rebuild those hotels, how much do we want to have that $4.5 million in reserve? The nice thing about switching out of VWR is that that's one less large tax revenue source that we have to worry about leaving town. Unfortunately, it's already left town. Because they left. There's I'm looking for any silver lining I can have.
You're relying on as opposed to, say, Recology.
Right, Recology, if there's, Recology is going to be here because people still need to throw away their garbage.
It's like a funeral service.
Yes. So I think and I'm not asking for an answer tonight, but I think these are when we're talking about how much money do we need in fund balance and how much do you want to have in reserves. I think these are some of the questions that we need to explore.
But your comments are extremely important to really understand what you're saying. A healthy baseline budget would have money to pay for their expense and to account for income and expense. The healthy fund balance would be to plan for unexpected things that happen. We are lucky this time that you can go for ecology source of revenue. But unexpected expenses happen not because of us, through county, through state, and planning for all of that. So when we have good years coming up is to say, let's make sure we put some money for possibly something happen that it's beyond our control.
What do you have any recommendations?
And not at this time.
Okay.
I don't know if Clay does. I know this is a big issue within the finance field at the
I mean, just to
moment.
throw it out there, I mean, you're right. I mean, this is something we should definitely be coming back to
Well, just
later, but
conceptually, and Stuart's already kind of hit on this, but I think we have kind of a 4-year issue with the monies that we're receiving through the Recology business license. And until we know that that's kind of solid and in place for the long run, I would think that we would want to have a higher reserve number. Once we get that solidified, then maybe we can look at a lower maximum number. We've got the minimum number already. I would throw out, like maybe 75% of your general fund expenditures you would have in reserves, and that would be right now in the neighborhood of
$9 million.
75%.
If we have about $12 million expenditure budget,
Right, so that'd be 9 million.
right,
Yeah,
which is about where we're going to be.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, long-term.
Yes,
In the short term or the
we
next
might want to
4
be.
years,
We may be over that.
So we should just plan prudently and then look at building our reserves until the ecology issues resolved in a permanent basis, one way or the other.
Yeah, and there's a potential that, that we may get a fairly large amount of money on a one-time basis based on the lawsuit with the Board of Equalization. We don't know that for sure yet. But my recommendation right now would be that if we did, we would just put that in the reserves for now until we know long-term what the issue with Recology is going to be. So then the other concept that I think we'll get into, but I'll just throw it out now, is that, maybe if you have that maximum amount, let's say at 75%, then on an annual basis, anything above that, using the waterfall analogy that we're using with redevelopment, goes into your capital fund. And that you then use that based on, and you would create your priorities in your capital fund, and you'd have a certain amount of money that you'd be able to use for capital improvements without eroding your general fund balance.
Right.
Which was the next slide I had.
Okay.
Well, but there's also the other things too. I mean, if a new library was something that we wanted to pursue, I mean, that also takes money as well. If there's things that the community wants to.
That's a capital expense.
Right. So that's
So that would be a capital expense.
Yeah,
Okay.
that'd be in the capital.
Okay.
Right, so-
I'm thinking of things like fixing up the marina.
Well,
or
and
something,
so-
but not adding things. So okay.
right. So then the question is if we exceed the maximum, whatever that maximum is, what do you use the excess for? As Clay says, there's a number of one-time capital expenses. Fixing up the marina is would be considered a one-time capital expense versus ongoing maintenance of it. Doing a library would be a one-time capital expense. So there is some one-time capital expenses that we would have. There are some one-time liabilities that we might want to review. We have some post-retirement costs that we're funding on a pay-as-you-go basis right now. And the reason being is that, as your finance director, when everybody was pre-funding their OPEB obligations, I was a little concerned that I'm not comfortable that the stock market is a place to put our money. And, a lot of people, as soon as they put money into their OPEB obligation, lost 25% of their money. Because the stock market went down. So now not only do they have the original liability, they had their original liability plus something. Because when we would fund OPEB, we would do it as an individual agency. When we fund our pension obligations through PERS, we're part of a pool. So as part of the pool, we share risk with everybody. So if we pre-fund our liability as part of the bigger pool, we don't lose our investment in that pool. we would only lose the small portion that we are of the overall pool. So that makes a lot of sense for us to fund pension obligations through PERS versus funding the OPEB. Because I will tell you, as a person who lives in the city and as a person who works in the city, I think the upside of this town is greater than what it is today. I think if you look at Crocker Industrial Park turning over in the next few years, if you look at the continued growth in Sierra Point with what the projects that have already been approved are, that we would see additional revenue coming from that. With redevelopment definitely going away, we're going to see more money coming out of tax increment in the existing redevelopment areas. And, you know, I would not presume that the Baylands is ever going to build. But if it does, that's another potential future revenue source 20, 30 years down the road. So I think, you know, looking at our OPEB obligations, I'm still uncomfortable in the short term putting a large amount of money into the stock market to fund them, because I still think that we have a better growth opportunity for money investing in ourselves as a community than we do investing in the stock market. So that's where I think we should be investing additional money. But I will say that I think it's different than dealing with PERS.
Right.
And there's a whole issue that I will plan to bring back to you in December about PERS pension issues, about that.
May I also, particularly for the two newly elected, this is not going to be my lifetime job, but one of the recommendations that I would certainly, having worked with 44 organizations that never ever on my clock have gone bankrupt, one thing that is really good, to designate fund for economic uncertainties. That is really, really important. And the other thing is to build back programs. When he was talking about other programs, you don't want somebody to sit over here, oh, we're getting this money, let's give it to this, let's make it very calculative and very mindful. You know that person is going to come, that organization, schools or whatever, they're going to come. But we don't want to be through what we've gone through. The budget was balanced on the back of a lot of employees. A lot of people don't realize that the comments that he just made about the 50% reserve and so forth, that would have been really bad. We would have not have as much money if we would have not have the cuts and reductions that took place. So, you know, people don't realize that when they're hearing we want the programs, we want to continue it, but a lot went on in here that people are not aware of.
We did that through attrition. It was a planned deal.
Correct.
And, you know, it's worked out, so.
Correct.
Yeah, no,
I mean,
been able to maintain those programs.
Right.
And a lot of that is because we had more than 50% in reserves. I mean, if we had only kept 50% in reserves, we would not have been able to go. We would not, as I would say, would not have been able to grow into a smaller budget like we did.
Right.
We would have had to slash our way into a smaller budget.
Right.
Right.
And then, yeah, as Councilmember Richardson said, and Mayor Lentz has said, another item is how do you grow your programs, and should there be a policy on how you make the decision on how you grow programs? So I think all those questions we should come back and have a more thorough conversation about, and have what the council policy is on fund balance, what the council policy is on if we get to excess above what we think are the economic uncertainties, excess in fund ahead of natural disasters, all those things. I mean, the rate, the staff that you have, the council that we've had in the past, council we currently have, the council I would anticipate this community electing in the future, I believe that we will get to a point again where we will have these kinds of, these conversations will once again be where we're centering our conversations, as opposed to looking, how do we shrink the balloon? I think we're going to be looking at how does the air go back into the balloon?
Right. Another area that I like to also mention that the staff has done a remarkable job on looking at rebonding or refinancing some of the things that we have had that they are at the higher interest rate to take advantage of the market and interest rate now. And I know you're looking at something that I really think that should be on a fast track, that you don't know how the interest rates are going to move. I think that's a really good one to look at it. And that we have. We have certain things that we're talking about, the capital outlay that we have. There are a lot of major stuff that we have. Maybe we need to really looking at the issues of bond and how we're going to handle that. The more we delay, the more expensive those things are going to become. But if we do it now, plan for it now, with the rates now, I think we can manage to do what we need for our residents. These are projects that we have are very critical. It's for the livelihood when we're talking about sewer, when we're talking about water, when we're talking about all of that are very critical. And the other thing that I had in mind, Stuart, some time back, we knew that PERS was talking about increasing the rate. And we are anticipating even they might even go up to 25% or something like that. Am I not correct? Isn't that, those are all the variations that are coming up. Costs are going to go up.
Right. I mean, we anticipated an increase in the PERS rate in our budget. I had anticipated a 2 to 3% increase in the current fiscal year budget. We will not see that this fiscal year. We will see a little bit of that next fiscal year and a little bit more in the future fiscal year. I think, barring another major downturn in the stock market, and that's the one I can't predict.
Yeah.
We will probably be relatively stable. I will tell you, though, I was just at the PERS conference, and PERS is looking at increasing its channel for their funded status. So traditionally, I'm going to get into real technical stuff, so if I get too boring, just tell me to go on. So traditionally, they try and keep their channel of their funded within the 80 to 120%. With the last stock market decrease, they increased that channel to 60 to 140. Because what that allowed them to do was to amortize that loss over a longer period of time. And then they decided that they were going to do 60 to 140 and bring that channel back to the 80 to 120. As very much in the popular press, is we know they're very close to that, on that 80% side. So if they have another loss, then that entire loss is going to have to be made up in one fiscal year.
Yeah.
What they're going to do, what they were talking about at the PERS conference, was they're going to look to permanently increase their channel to 60 to 140, which will mean that we'll have more variation, smaller variations year to year, but less large variations due to one loss. Is it good? Is it bad? I don't know. I mean, this is...
Depends.
It depends, right. It depends on which kind of bet you want to make.
Right.
I think they're betting on bigger annual swings in the stock market. I mean, I think that's where they're guessing is going to happen. Because what will happen is if you have an 80 to 120 channel, and this happened to us in the late 1990s, is we were above that 120, which meant that people were superfunded. And when people were superfunded, because we were above the 120, the unions, not that they're all bad people, but the unions came forward and says, you guys are superfunded, that's our money, because it was our money that was invested on our behalf. We would like better benefits because it's our money.
Yep.
And at the same time that they were doing that, PERS was telling the cities, since you're superfunded, you don't need to invest any additional money with us. Yeah. Well, that's a bad combination of ideas. One or the
long-term strategy.
Yes, one or the other may have worked well, but when you combined the two, what you did is you created a large unfunded liability, and you ignored long-term results in the stock market. Because if you were to look at PERS returns, if you were to look at them over the last 30 years from today, my understanding is they are still at this about 7.9%. So they still are they're hitting their 7 3/4, but what happened was everybody asked for more benefits at the same time that they were telling people don't invest with us. And as you know, through dollar cost averaging, you want to invest in all markets. And if everybody had invested, then we would not be in the same situation we're in. Mm-hmm. And if we didn't ask for bigger benefits wasn't requested, we wouldn't be in the same situation. So when they changed that channel, What it means is that as the stock market has bigger and bigger swings, there will be no change in what they're asking for
Because the band is.
because the band is bigger. So it works on both the upside and on the downside. So that's what I'm reading into that conversation. They are unsure of future returns. They're sure of the long-term return, but they're very uncomfortable with the short-term returns. So that's my quick PERS analysis on pension stuff. And as you know, that's one of those areas I just love to talk about. So I'll come back and spend more time on it later.
Okay.
I never
Wanted
would have
to-
guessed that.
Oh, sorry.
No, I was just saying, I never would have guessed that with
Oh,
Yeah.
I wanted to piggyback on what Seppi was saying about long-term planning for capital. And I think maybe what we should do, or maybe it's been done and I haven't seen it or I don't recall seeing it, is a full explication of all the unfunded capital maintenance and improvements that's on the docket. Because, if we got all that laid out there, we might not have any excess.
Correct. And I think that's what you will see. We did that, I think,
good point.
2007.
Right, 2000.
2007 is the last time we brought it forward to council.
Definitely going to get there.
Obsolete, obsolete.
Right, and we are working on bringing that back. I mean, that, as you noticed, that was on the list of things to be brought back to
Right.
council
Yeah.
during this fiscal year.
Right, so I think that'll make a difference in how we think about all of this.
Yep.
Once we get a handle on what we're looking at. I mean, just the water and sewer alone is kind of mind-boggling.
Yep,
And then there are many others as well.
There's,
yep.
we wouldn't have enough money.
Exactly, I mean, that's the point.
I
Yeah,
mean,
so,
we wouldn't even
shouldn't
be
talking about
close.
excess.
We
that's
wouldn't
what
be
I'm-
close, but
point.
I think what they're talking about, the excess is in regards to the general fund balance and then taking whatever, putting it into the capital reserve.
Right.
And then us prioritizing on those projects of what we wanted to get done.
But
Of course,
the
that was-
question is, reserves exceed maximum needed. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
Well,
question.
and I was thinking more about it as far as the other issues that Councilmember Richardson was talking about, is the economic reserves that are needed. What do we need for the emergencies? What do we want to have to cover recessions?
I agree with all of that, but,
And then the question is how much after that, how much do we put into capital?
right.
Absolutely, and that's why one-time capital is first on the list of ideas as to what do we do once we exceed your fund balance policy of saying X% for the general fund.
But I think we need to get a handle, at least I feel a need
Yes.
to get a handle on all the
Yeah,
Absolutely,
Yeah.
unfunded capital needs that the city has.
and we will bring that forward.
I agree.
Yeah.
That's going to be pretty, I mean, we have that information. It's just probably updating the numbers.
Yes.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
Right. But that's very instructive, I would think.
yeah.
And then another sort of policy decision, I noticed that, you weren't funding the depreciation reserves in some instances. And, there was a decision made that there may be better ways to finance it, but I think we need to have that conversation.
Yeah,
And I was thinking especially about the dredging issue in the marina.
yes, I agree.
So that's another part of that conversation.
Right.
Yes.
It is, I mean, that's all tied in there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. All right, Stuart.
Moving back to where we left off, I think it may have been April was the last time you visited the idea of the categorizing programs. There was 3 categories that you discussed. The categories were valuable, important, and must. You developed definitions for those categories. The definitions are for valuable programs. They were programs that add to the quality of life of the community. They're not critical to provide for the safety or health of the community. You have important programs, which are service or activity that affects a broad spectrum of the community. So I think the real distinguishing factor between valuable and important is how many people are served. And then critical to the effective and efficient operation of a city department. So an important program would be making sure payroll happens. If you want to have employees, you need to have payroll. Of course, I might also consider that a must because it's required to pay people by law. Services minimally required for a city to function, which provide for the health and safety of the community or required by law. And then I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about all the conversations that the city council has had over the last year when we were talking about these programs. And I think there is an additional category that we need to talk about. I think an additional category is funding, a funding type of category, and not specific dollar amounts, but how council would like to think about funding programs. So I think there's a category called ongoing funding. So these are, and I will tell you, these are my definitions and my examples. So anybody in the audience who's sitting over on the right can deny all knowledge of this. And this is the first time council has seen it. So this is truly just all me. Another reason why most of my staff doesn't like it when I start thinking out on my own. So an ongoing program is programs which will continue between years unless something significant changes within the community. So examples that I thought of is you have police patrol, you have fire protection, you have preschool and after-school programs, you have the marina maintenance, you have the swimming pool, you have plan checks and building inspections, basic financial services, maintenance of city acres. I think these are programs that the city council has over the last year talked about and said, yeah, we want to make sure that these are ongoing programs of the city. And then you have what I would consider conversations that you might want to have annually when you talk about funding. So these are items which would be reviewed annually by the council during a budget process to determine level of service and cost unless, again, something significant changes within the community. So an example might be the yard waste cleanup. You had that conversation this fiscal year. You decided not to fund the $10,000. We brought it back. And you may want to have that conversation again every year based on how your finances are doing. Support of outside organizations. We went through a whole list of outside organizations that you support. Some you decided to not support this fiscal year. You may want to revisit those kinds of things every year. Employee contracts. I, as your chief labor person internally, I would like to have longer-term contracts, but you may want to explore these kinds of issues every year to determine, what are we funding our employees at. Individual recreation programs. Do you want to have a day in the park this year? Do you want to have the tree lighting this year? Is that really where you want to spend your money in this given year? Or are there other recreation programs that you say, yeah, this year we're not going to do, but next year we may pick it back up as we're doing better? And then training. This was an area that we spent a lot of time on during the budget and reduced training one year, and maybe next year, there may be a reason to do more training. So there's annual conversations. And then there's one-time conversations. Expenses which occur one time or occasionally in a 10-year period. The obvious one are capital projects. You dredge the marina this year, chances are, barring any real unusual activity, you're not going to dredge it again for at least 10, 15, 20 years. You build a city hall, again, barring anything unusual, you're not going to build a city hall every 10 years. The financial system purchase. Our current financial system is 15 to 20 years old. It's something that probably every 15 years you should be thinking about looking at what's the latest and best financial software so that way you can make the best use of staff time. Vehicle purchases. There's a lot of vehicles like fire engines, like Vactors that you don't buy every couple of years. You buy them once and they last for an extremely long period of time. We do a history book every 25 years. We have an anniversary party. We had a 50th. I don't know if we're going to do a 60th or a 75th, but it's not an annual event. What?
We do it every 5 years. We've done it every 5 years since the 35th.
Okay, I'll take that out of one-time expense and put that back into the annual category. But the history book, for example, then, we don't do that every 5. Because if we did, we would never finish one. So those were the ideas of what I was thinking as additional categories. So let me give you an example of what I think a chart could look like for this. And again, this is me thinking out in my own head. So if you don't agree with the definition categories or you don't agree with the funding categories, that's, I take no offense. So police patrol, I think you've already defined that as a must category, and I think the funding category would be an ongoing expense. So that would be a must and an ongoing. Maintenance of acres. I think that's a valuable thing. I think it's, if you look back at the definitions, valuable, it adds to the quality of life of the community. But you might have a conversation whether or not it affects a broad spectrum of the community. I'm not quite sure, but you can have that conversation. So it would be either a valuable or an important definition, but it's an ongoing expense. I think the council has talked about that we bought the acres and we have an obligation to maintain them. So that would be an ongoing expense. Manage vegetation for fire protection. That's already been defined as a must, but you might want to have the conversation every year as to how much you want to fund it. So that might be a must with an annual. The day in the park, that's an important one because it affects a wide range in the community. A lot of people in the community go down there, and it's an annual funding issue. And then a fire station as a one-time capital expense is a must, and it becomes a one-time funding category. So as you go through them, and you can see that just because you put something in the must category or the valuable category or the important category, it doesn't affect what funding category it goes in. Then when we're developing budgets, we can then look at how do we look at the different categories. Because the challenge, and I've had this conversation with the council before, is if I try and look program by program, we slice people up in programs. So for instance, a portion of Steve Beatty's time, who's a recreation supervisor, is now in the pool. A portion of his time is now in teen programs. A portion of time is in youth sports. So if the city council was to say that we wanted to close the teen center half-time, I couldn't sit there and say, I'm going to eliminate 3% or 5% of Steve. I mean, that's just not a possibility. So to try and come up with a cost per program that you can really budget from becomes difficult, but when we start talking about bundles of programs, it becomes a lot easier. So that's why I was thinking if we can try and figure out what are our ongoing programs, what are the annual programs, what are the one-time programs. From a funding perspective, I can come up with costing that. If you put them in different categories, I think all that's trying to do is say, who does it affect? And then what I did is I went through and just placed every single program that we've talked about into this kind of a matrix. Those that you've already defined as musts, I put the musts on. Those that you haven't defined, I have left blank. And obviously, we haven't talked about the funding category yet. So, because that's a brand new concept tonight. So I've left all those blank. So, I think what, council has talked about coming back to this kind of a matrix in the past. I think this might be a good time to start that conversation. And as I said, maybe the idea of that funding category might help really try and get your arms around some of these issues that I know council struggled with last year, because there's a number of programs that were said that whether it's important, valuable, or a must, we're still going to fund it. And therefore it becomes harder to define as important, valuable, or must. And as opposed to looking at it that way, we can look at it both ways. I think that might just make the conversation easier. And I offer that up to the city council for their consideration. And then all the rest of this is just all the different programs, department by department. So that puts me done with my presentation.
All right. Any questions for staff? Ray?
I have a reaction. Also, kind of off the top of the head, so. I think it makes sense for you to sort of go further than we've been able to go so far down this road. But I guess I'm thinking about it a little bit differently, and so I want to test this out on you and my colleagues and see what you think. As I've said all along, the problem that I had with those three categories that are simply abstract categories by a program is that they don't have any level of financial support alongside of them. And even though everybody agrees that, police and fire are must, We have different ideas, and it changes over time as to how much money you want to spend, which depends on how many police you have on patrol and how many firemen you have per engine, and, there are all kinds of variables that determines how much you spend even on the must categories. And if you spend less rather than more, then you have money to be able to do other things, presuming that, the budget is still there. So it seems to me that a more, from my mind anyway, a more useful way of approaching it is to, relate the level of service that's the minimum must in a particular budgeted category or accounting category. The problem with dividing it up into all these programs is that they're not associated with any particular budgeted amounts. And therefore, you can't connect programs and dollars. At least we haven't been able to do that yet. And so then we look at this table and we get all these abstract, must, important, valuable, and then you look at another table and you got all these categories the way the budget's actually kept in an accounting fashion, and you got dollars and cents, and they don't match up. So in my mind, there's a disconnect there. And in order for us to get a handle on, okay, so what is it, the minimum must in police, we've got to relate that to actual decision-making about the police department. And we were talking about that earlier tonight. We know that the police don't have quite enough personnel, and as a consequence, there's a lot of overtime. And so the question was, maybe we need to, add some police. Well, if we add police, then that's less money that's available elsewhere. But those are the kind of decision-making that the budget process generates. And in my mind, unless you can relate those accounting categories to specific dollar amounts, to specific program deliveries, it's very difficult to make any kind of rational decisions. And that's the problem I had with this whole budget process, that there was a disconnect between the abstract program categories and the actual dollars and cent accounting categories. And what I would like, I like your way of thinking, because clearly we're not going to, just because, recreation comes out as not a must, that doesn't mean we're going to eliminate the recreation program. We're going to have some recreation. We're certainly going to continue the pool. We got investment there. We're certainly going to continue the marina. We got investment there. So, there are other variables that we have to take into account. And so, to me, I don't see how we can really look comprehensively at all the trade-offs in the budget unless you can get the information via the programs related to accounting categories with dollars and cents in them at different levels of performance.
May I?
If you let Stuart, I would prefer.
I know, but it's not preference.
Okay.
It is something that needs to be said. I 100% agree with what you're saying. What you were looking with was just narrative. We never got to put the dollar amounts for. We were heading to that, if you remember. This was just, imagine if you're processing and you're starting a baseline budget. This was the very, very first step. We didn't know how to start to saying, okay, all the stuff that we have, do we need to have? Can we do it any other way? Could we contract it out? Could we do it in-house? That's what this was about. Then we would want it to take this and put dollar. That's exactly what we were heading, that we've never gone to.
Okay.
But that's exactly what you said. That was the direction that Cliff, myself, and the staff were heading. 100%.
Stuart, you want to take
Thank you,
a
Mr.
crack and
Mayor.
add that too? Yeah.
There's a give and take in everything that we do, and I agree. So, just looking at the city clerk's issues, one of the things that the city clerk does is maintain the records of the city. If I was to tell you maintaining the records of the city took an hour of her time a week and $20,000 to data lock, the challenge would be if you say, well, how about if we only use half an hour of her time, what do we get? we're still going to have a city clerk. If instead you told me, I want to eliminate a city clerk for whatever reason, I hope you don't, but if you told me that, then I can say, okay, which of these things do you still want staff to do? Do you want this community to still have? And we would come back with another way of coming up with it. So the question is it a must program? Is it a program that you want to have as an ongoing program? And then we will work to fit all the ongoing programs into a budget and tell you what it takes to fund all of our ongoing programs. We then could say, okay, what are the annual programs? Here's different, and we would say to you, here's different ways that we could provide those ongoing programs. And you as a council and you as a community as a whole have a choice on how we're going to provide those ongoing programs. And you can say, well, I want to provide all the must ongoing programs and all of the valuable or important ongoing programs, and I want to spend a lot more time looking at the important ongoing programs or whatever. And you can say, okay, here's how we do that. The challenge is, for me, trying to give you the information you need in a way that it helps make decisions. And I agree, but if I was to come to you and say, do you want a 7-minute response time or a 5-minute response time for police? Your answer is going to be, is the person in immediate danger or are they not in immediate danger? And I would say, okay, how many hot robberies do you think we're going to have this year? And my answer is, I don't know, and I hope you don't know. I mean, it's just like, that's just a guess. But if you tell me I want to have a patrol system that can respond to emergencies, I can say, okay, we can do that with X number of police officers, and here's their shifts. Or we can do it with the sheriff's department, and here's their cost. Or we can do it by contracting with South San Francisco. And all of those have very different political implications. All of those have different cost implications. But the first question I need to know is, do you want us to do police patrol? And then we can have the conversation of what does that look like. So I agree with you, we need to get there. And the question, and I think this is where the subcommittee was coming from, is before we get to that question of how much does it cost and how are we going to provide it, what is it that we're trying to provide? And abstractly, what are we trying to provide, not concretely? I think I'm not trying to put words in the subcommittee's mouth, but that was the sense. And what I'm trying to do as your staff person is to get to your point and to get to Seppi's point on the cost in the same way of getting to the abstract issue. And I'm trying to figure out how do I make everybody happy?
Yeah.
Well, that may not be possible, but
May I add to
That's my
just the
goal in
example
life. I
he
keep
gave?
telling Cliff that.
We were talking about, for example, there was a discussion. Do we need to have a full-time city clerk? Okay? We have a full-time city clerk. If you have to cut the budget, do we need to have a full-time city clerk? Then we started saying, what does a city clerk do? Then he started saying this, this, this. And we started looking, is this a must? Do we need to have this? Can somebody else do it? Can this? So now the other thing that right now with the list of the duties that he is given, how much time does this take to get the work? Is it really, does this take 100% of the person? Or is it 50% of the time? Because if this takes 100% of the time and it's all must, you have to fund this. Then let's put a dollar amount. That's the direction we were going. But we know right now the city clerk is having other duties. So another deficiencies that we had that you were talking about, the accounting system. Our accounting system right now, 100% of the schools can tell you what is the source, what is the function, all of that. Our accounting system, the chart of account, is very limited. Just gives you the basic. Cannot give you all these detail.
And in defense of the accounting system, if we were to try and allocate expenses on every one of these programs that you have before you, we would need more staff to input the information. And in order to get it to this level of detail on a budget level, we would be spending more time inputting because we would have a bill from Costco that might get split 18 different ways as opposed to 2.
It's coding, yes.
So coding takes time. So if, we are one of the last cities to have MOM as our financial system, which is going to be one of the reasons I'm going to come forward because I'm concerned about them keeping their code up to date.
Yes.
But even if we got a new system, given the level of staff that we have, I don't know if I can ever get to the level of detail
Right.
on these. So,
Right.
so the other solution is that instead of looking at programs like in this level of detail, you look at programs in a bigger fashion. And that might get to what you're talking about. But, if I talk about it in a bigger fashion, you may lose something like you don't want to do the blog anymore. Because if I talk about all of communications as a bigger program, we're not talking about the individual items that we do for communication. We're not talking about the story. I'd be talking about it bigger. So what I was trying to do here was give it to you on a granular basis, and then based on the granular basis, build up to, I think, what you're looking for on the bigger level. Because once you tell me that you don't want to do the blog, then I can rethink how we're doing communications.
Yeah, but,
If I can't, Clark?
okay.
I'm sorry.
I just kind of want to, I'm listening to it, and it's not that I disagree at all, because, I do agree with what you're saying, and Seppi also, and Stuart also. Trying to pull all this together, because I was just going back over when we started this process, which was, well, the subcommittee started it long before it actually came to the council, but it came to the council about a year and 4 or 5 months ago, something like that. And this kind of predated both you and Terry. But when you
I was
came
here.
on, huh?
I was here.
Yeah, you were sitting.
I was sitting in the audience.
We were sitting in the audience listening to it, and it was a difficult because it was new. It was new to the council, and I know that the subcommittee even said that they struggled, on identifying these categories and stuff, and how it comes down. But when we started down this road, our budget outlook was much different than it is right now. You agree with that? That when we started down this road, we were looking at having this $1 million
Big deficit. Right.
And we were looking at this as using this as a mechanism to get to the point of, are we going to fund this through reserves, or are we going to cut? And now we're not there. Now we're not there. But that doesn't mean that we won't ever come back to it again, because we still have these uncertainties, I think, that we talked about with Recology. We know we have this 4-year funding, and I want to give staff kudos for that too, by the way, on Clay and you and your staff on negotiating, getting that full 2.1 million. And, that does need to be recognized, because when we started this process, that wasn't there. And now we've got that, and we know we have that for 4 years. So to me, I see this as an evolutionary type document, on this journey. And as with any journey, it begins with the first step. And I think that first step is defining what we think right now, what these categories are. And then the next step is what the funding category is. And then the next step is maybe assigning these dollar amounts that maybe won't be exact, but ballparkish. And I think that's where, and Stuart, I'm trying to grasp what you're thinking, that maybe this is where we're going, what you're saying.
That's exactly it. It's not really, I don't think this is Stuart's response. That's
Yeah.
exactly what we were trying to do,
Yeah.
to come up with a dollar amount. And the thing is, it was a different time period, because
Yeah.
in finance, I give recognition to that. At the same time, believe me, if we start going in this budget process that we have and giving dollar amount to the work that everybody is doing, doesn't matter whether the economy goes bad or not, you would know what is your baseline budget should be. So when somebody comes and says, oh, let's give the bus to the school, you would say, okay, we have this money in the reserve, we can do that. You don't have the money down the line, something happens, you can easily pull it out. You're not picking it up from the base. You're taking it from the excess that you have. We don't have that right now. Somebody says, let's do it, we'd give it, we'd take it. That's where we are, the way it is right now. The staff has had to struggle and take this and add this and so forth. That's not how the budget should run.
Terry?
I think that we've got a couple different things. We want to get an acceptable level of service for our residents, and we want to get some data extraction that is reasonable and functional, that with the limited amount of research and coding we can do to get that information. And I think that some of the areas that that the budget committee worked on putting down what does the city, and I'm just pulling out the city clerk because she's the first on the list. What does she do? What does she have to do? And I think that you can take that city clerk area and add in maybe the value-added programs that she's currently doing, whatever those may be. And part of that's council support and commission support and public relations that her office is doing. And you could assign a dollar figure to that along with the expenses that come from doing those items. And I think that while it's good to have the list of what her duties are or what she's performing for that X amount of data, those really aren't the programs that really need to have the finite, what does it really cost us to do? More so, it's the Parks and Recreation, all the things that we had the big blank on our things. Are they valuable? Are they important? And I think that last year the staff did a good job of putting a dollar amount on training, on running the pool, on running of the teen center. And while those may not have been exact, and we had a discussion on whether it should include the overall administration umbrella costs, and I think that it should, to a certain degree, show those costs. I don't think that we need to get down into the Sherry spends .001 part of her year administering oaths when we know it's twice a year or 4 times a year she comes in and swears in someone. She's here for those meetings. She has to be here for those meetings, or someone else does. So I think that we could micromanage this and be looking for that tiny little bit of data to say, oh, well, we could save half an hour here. And I think it's more that we need to look at the bigger picture on the bigger optional. I don't really like the valuable and important grouping. It's more that it's optional.
But that's not tied to funding, though. And,
Yeah.
and I think we got to make sure we don't get that confused, because the definition category is
Well, things that
understanding how these services are, how we touch the community. And so I think, and that's where the important and valuable are important. Because
True, but those
so we
are
can understand,
subjective.
so that.
So wait, what you're talking about is having 2 categories,
And I
musts and optionals.
Well, I mean, and.
I'm just asking, I'm not
Part of
trying
that
to put
was
words.
with your ongoing funding, annual funding. I like that idea that certain categories come back as
Yeah, no, I think
annual
funding
funding
category is great.
or ongoing funding because it is a continuing program. And I think that would work better. And again, there's your analogy of if we cut out one program, we can't tell an employee, well, 7/8 of your day, you're not here anymore, because it doesn't really work that way.
But
We have to-
that wasn't the direction, though. I think this is where you guys are not quite understanding the point. When we started looking at the city clerk, she had a lot of functions that was a must, okay? It was a must. Let's say you just talked about election. We went every 2 years or whatever, but it's a must. You can't say we can't do about it. But when we went to senior programs, okay, seniors have trips, seniors have lunches. We pay for all of that. Okay, are those a must? They're really not a must, but it's a value to us. It's something that it's value to our society, value to our, that's what we were trying to define. If you're trying to say the stuff that are must, you have to have, you better have the money to support it. That's where, so it wasn't the label. I think what I'd really like you to guys to not let the label, if you can come up with a better word, we're open to it. We were just trying to come up with some definition to show what is a must that we have to fund.
Well, if I can, you know, back in, I think the last time we went through this, we kind of went around that circle, if I recall,
Yeah, we already agreed.
You're right.
on the
Definitions,
categories.
of course.
And
Yes.
and then develop, and then we collectively agreed that this is what we would do, is an assignment that we would assign the definition. Those are the three definitions we came up, and we know must is must.
Got it.
Legally required.
But the others,
And we
but the others don't necessarily mean anything, you know, other than we're trying to put a description on it. I mean, whether it's red, green, or blue, but we're saying, okay, is it a valuable thing, and this is what we define as valuable, or is it important, and this is what we define as important? And so really where it's at is us to just go through the list and see what we can collectively agree upon on this first phase. If I'm correct.
That's correct.
The first phase
That's correct.
of this process that is going to be ongoing, and then at that point, we agree upon that, then the subcommittee would then go back and work with staff on the funding category, and then come back to the council, and then, and it's not a short-term process. It's a
No.
continual thing, and then at some point, we'll have dollar figure, and it's, Terry, as you say, it's not going to be down to the,
Yeah, we're
you
not
know, Nat's
micromanaging.
button, but it'll be a ballparkish figure that this is about what this would cost, as we say, definition category, funding category, and probably cost category, and then
Right.
whatever category.
Ray hit it on the head. When you don't have dollars to categories and you're talking about budget, it's a bunch of words.
It's abstract. It's
Okay,
too
it's a
abstract.
bunch of words. And I give you guys recognition for truly not because you don't have the whole picture. All you have is a bunch of verbiage. The thing that was really a must didn't mean that you continue the way you've been continuing. When we were talking about police, it's a must service. But do we need to do it ourselves? Could we contract it out? What would be the cost of contracting out versus us? If we're still efficient and what we're doing, then we continue it.
Yeah, that's a perfect example, Safi.
We're not saying that continue because it's a must or it's valuable. It doesn't mean sometimes the valuable is so valuable that it's a lot more important than a must. But we don't have the dollar amount, and we weren't trying to micromanage. We were trying to really have a job description in the budget for us to come and say, why is this a full-time job? Why is we are offering this? If you have to cut down, do you want to cut down the lunch, for example, for seniors? Because you don't have it. If everything you have is supporting the current way of doing things that is a must operation, do you have money to support lunches? That's where we were heading. Now it's time to come and put dollar. We've gone through
First, we got to do the definition.
Clark said, we have agreed that this is good. Now, let's go through putting dollar, and at that time, you can come back and say, you know what, yes, it's valuable, it's must, or not at all. Then this must is not something that is going to appear in the budget. This was just a baseline to start adding dollar amounts.
Right now, I see it as a tool. I see
That's
it
exactly.
be as a tool for
That's-
future councils, and it's probably more of a living document type thing that would change, as I think Clay referred to us earlier as a fluid organization. And
It's for current council
with
to
that
start
fluidity,
budgeting.
you're going to change as you go along. And that it may not be something that we necessarily are going to need to fall upon to say, okay, let's look at this these next 4 years, because things look more stable than what they have since prior to 2007, and I think that's a fair statement.
Yeah, but using this document, defining the categories, doing the funding category, you can use this when times are bad, you can use it when times are good.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, this is just, again, it's more, for defining the categories, it's not about funding, it's about understanding how you impact the community. And so, we've already defined the, what those definitions are and at a previous council meeting. So, and we've already assigned the musts from the things that we spend money on. The last thing that we haven't done, at least in this stage of the game, is to categorize these items that are blank, the valuable and the important. And so,
So this is kind of the purpose of this exercise tonight, is to go through this, and
just-
Ray, and that's where Ray is.
I'm not with this yet, sorry. It's still a disconnect in my mind.
It needs dollar
And
amount.
the disconnect is that these program categories that you came up with are not the same as the budgeted accounting categories. That's my problem.
we're not going there, though. I mean,
But if you're not going there, there's no point in my
You know what? You're
opinion.
getting ahead of the game.
No, I don't think so. I mean, that is the game.
Okay, well, then you know what? I don't think you're ever going to get there. So,
I don't agree with that.
No, no,
Well,
no.
you think that
actually,
you'll eventually get there?
Cliff?
Of course.
No. I'm sorry, Ray Miller, may I make you think? If you look at these categories on the far right,
Yeah.
it talks about departments, really does.
Right.
City clerk, we went to city manager, it follows the budget, am I not correct?
Right, I mean, each of these are a different department within, and then it defines,
The budget book had nothing to do with these programs.
Okay, guess what? Let me share honestly the goodness. There's a major thing in the budget that we do not really, as a decision maker, you really do not know. Right now, if you look at the budget for 2010, it continues with a little modification year after year.
Okay.
Doesn't show what was that budget that you had, is that actual or not? You don't have that. Am I not correct? In your program
Well-
description,
within the individual program
Correct.
descriptions, that's true, but within the departments, on the first overall summary page, it shows by account number what the actual expenditures were. And this gets back to a question of how much time do you want staff to spend in coding? Do you want us to code to 5,000? Probably if I go through the budget, there are probably 5,000 different kinds of things we're trying to give you information on.
right, but what
And if
happened?
you would like us to do that, then if you tell me that's what you want,
But-
I can come back with how much staff time that would take.
Ray, let's say in one budget, in 1 year, they said $80,000 budgeted, okay? But in actuality, they spent 60,000,
Eh,
right? Then the following year, they still budget 80,000, okay? But they really needed only 60. This continues. And I'm looking at that and I'm saying, why am I budgeting 60 and 80? They turn back and they say, because we really don't know whether it's going to be 80 or 60, so we budget. So I said, if you don't know that, why don't we just go ahead and put this on a designated? So if you need money, then you can go from, to your reserve that you set up or whatever.
Yeah, again, we're categorizing the things that impact the community, the services that we're providing. That's what we're tasked.
Everything we do
Yeah,
does that.
I know,
trying to-
but-
Just trying to understand, Ray, what you're saying is that you're saying that this should correlate with line items in our budget.
Yes.
It is going to.
Yeah, okay. Let me kind of get there.
Yes.
So, Stuart, under the program names, some of these may be numerous line items.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes, and some of them may be one line item.
Yeah.
Like if you look in Parks and Rec, Day in the Park is a single line item.
And so really, if we wanted, we could put the line item numbers,
Right.
text, if we use this as the document, right, we could put the line item.
I can put the line item numbers, but the problem, I mean, the
But
difficult.
it's going to take a lot of,
Well, it'll take some tough time, but the other problem will be is that you might find under maintenance, under the city clerk, you might have the same line item on 6 different items.
Right.
And that's what Ray is trying to say, is that doesn't work for him.
It doesn't work for me,
right,
exactly.
right.
But in those areas, then we look at that.
Right. That we can do.
Yes,
Within the budgeted categories.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So, maybe let's not talk about definition categories. Let's talk about funding categories instead. And the question is, maybe what we look at are what are the things you want to look at annually? And say, okay, these are the things we want to look at on an annual basis. And we put dollar amounts to those select items. And, if you go through and say, okay, here's what we want to do, here's the kinds of things we want to look at annually. We can come back and say, okay, here's the cost of providing that program. The ones that are ongoing, as Councilmember Richardson said, of course, we're going to continue to look at different ways of providing those services. I mean, we have, as staff, shown that we've been doing that for the last 5 years.
Right.
Otherwise, you would have a budget that's $3 million higher than it currently is.
Right.
So staff has already taken that responsible
Right.
position.
Right.
But what we really don't have a good handle on, and I think this is part of what you're saying and part of what Councilmember Richardson is saying, is what are the critical things that we should be looking at as a community annually to see if we have the funding capacity to fund those. Not that we don't want to fund them, but given the current financial circumstances, these are the things that we really want to concentrate on annually. And then as a city council and as staff, those things that are more on the ongoing basis, you will see again during the budget process, because we bring the whole budget to you. So that might be a way to move forward, is say, okay, which of these programs do you want to see us really delve into the cost detail on and really look at on an annual basis? Because as you say, if we're going to fund the swimming pool on an ongoing basis and we're going to keep it open the number of hours we're keeping it open, do you really want our limited staff to spend 30 hours or 10 hours delving into that question when we can instead take that 10 hours and delve into the question, what does it really cost us to put on a day in the park? Which you may want to make on an annual basis, or the Festival of Lights, and I know I'm picking on Parks and Rec because it's just easy to pick on, or let me pick on...
Pick on yourself.
Well, that is picking on myself. I am picking on myself when I do that. Yeah, I am Parks and Rec, and I am the pool. But cost of service analysis. I can say if you want to look at how much we're going to spend on an annual basis for cost of service analysis, or how much you want us to spend on an annual basis on performance measure coordination. And maybe this year we do more of it, maybe next year we do less, and maybe one year we do a whole lot of it. We can do that. And that might get to where you're trying to get to. It might blend this idea. And I mean, I think if we've already decided these are the musts, maybe, and I'm trying to move forward. Maybe what the subcommittee can do, because I know they've already looked at it one time, was come back with those definitional ideas of what are valuables and what are importance. Because they've already gone through that process.
We've already
themselves.
approved it. As a body.
Well, no, but you've already gone through and labeled everything as well.
we have.
And so maybe it might be that I just bring that sheet of paper back and you can say, yeah, that makes sense by that definition. But if you let me, as a staff person, say, here's the things that I want you to spend more time digging into the financials of, I can do that. As I said, I'm just trying to.
I know you're trying to move it along. I mean, it's the thing is, we've had like months.
it's
man,
a
dealing with
difficult-
this, and we're not getting there. And when we have something like the pool, and we say yes, we have to keep the pool open. I want to know why we need to keep the pool open. I mean, that's what I want to know, and it has nothing really to do with the dollars because we throw out $400,000 to subsidize it. So you can't use money to say why you're keeping it open, unless, of course, it was $2 million. Then you say, okay, maybe now we can't keep it open. But we spend $400,000. So there's a reason why we do it, and that's what we're trying to define for all the things we spend money on, so that we are accountable for those things, so that then we can move forward, and we've been talking about it, so we can then apply the financial issues to it. Like Clark said, it's a tool that helps us and helps staff to understand these things that we want to fund.
But it's not a finite detail like a line item thing. It
is not.
It's a ballparkish thing. And so, Ray, I guess maybe to ask you, given Stewart's second appeal,
Yeah.
would you be comfortable assigning a funding category nomenclature?
Well, I'm not quite sure exactly what that means.
Well,
But it is still my contention, and maybe I'm missing something, but it is still my contention that there is a disconnect between this program important and whatever, the programs on the one hand, and the budget categories on the other.
Okay,
They don't mesh.
let me say yes to that.
And because they don't mesh, it doesn't seem to me we get really magnitude understanding of what we are spending or what we are actually using of our resources in relationship to everything else. There's a lack of interrelationship between our expenditures. And the budget is a question of trade-offs. I mean, we could spend the whole thing on police if we wanted to, because we need 10 police around the clock. I mean, but we don't do that because we think there's a certain amount that we can get by on.
Exactly.
Yeah, so what you need to do is
Right.
and that's where I think we really, in some respects, where we want to come out is the same. My problem is how we get to where we want to come out.
So let me try something different. Let me pick up on something that Mayor Lentz had said. So you're right, they don't. But these are all the things that we currently do. This list of things is what we do this is what the community has decided the city organization is going to provide the community.
Right.
What Mayor Lentz is saying, he needs to be able to explain to his constituency why we do that.
Sure.
And that's what the definition category is. It's not, you're right, it's not talking about it from a budget perspective, but it's saying, why do we do a blog update? We do a blog update because either it is...
Adds value.
It is, it adds some kind of value for the community. It either affects a broad spectrum of the community, it's critical to the effective and efficient operation of a city, or it adds to the quality of life. One of those reasons is why we do a blog. And what Cliff would like to be able to say is when somebody asks him, gee, Cliff, why do you do a blog? He can come back and say, we as a council have decided to do a blog because we feel that it adds to the quality of life of the community, it informs the community, and makes a better community. And you're right, that has nothing to do with the budget from that perspective, other than when we develop a budget and we do a blog, there's a cost that becomes inherent in it. So, and this is where I think there's a listening to the conversation.
You were almost there.
This is where I think the disconnect is.
Geez, you were so close.
Right, this is where I think the disconnect is Cliff is using the definition category for a different reason than you want to use the definition category. He wants to use it to say, if we're doing these things, he wants to be able to justify them in some fashion. You're saying, if we're doing these things, I want to know what the cost is.
Right.
And those are slightly two different reasons for using it.
And the costs are always in relationship to what we're spending on everything else,
For the budget.
because we have only so much money to spend.
Correct, for the budget,
Right.
but not for why we do it. Does that difference make sense? That you're right, there's a cost to it, there's a budget to it, and there's a trade-off budgetarily.
Right.
But there's also a reason why we do it.
Sure.
And they don't have to be connected.
But they
don't have to be connected. They don't have to
There are
be.
multiple reasons.
Correct.
One of the reasons is how much it costs in reference to how much we have to afford. Another reason is, okay, we got a big capital investment in it. Another reason is that this is something that the people really want. Another reason, I mean, you could go on, and there are and this program
Correct.
generates revenue, like the marina, that's another reason why we keep it. So there are a whole lot of different reasons for something, not just one definitional set of simplistic categories.
And I think, okay, and I will concede, because I'm staff and it's really a council issue, so I concede. And I think that is what the subcommittee and what the mayor is trying to get to through this process, is when he gets asked on the street, why do you have the marina? That he can come back with a reason that the whole council has agreed to. Not that it's a Cliff Lentz reason why I do it, but it's a whole council reason. And if the whole council reason is because it produces revenue for the community, then I think, not to put words in his mouth or Councilmember Richardson's mouth, then maybe there needs to be a different definition category added. Revenue producing. And so that way, what the subcommittee was trying to do is say, we need to define why we do everything that we're doing.
I'm in no problem with that.
And that's what.
That makes sense.
Okay, so that's what.
We got to know, how much is it costing?
Correct. But that's a different question.
The next one.
That's a different question from why we do it.
We are on step A, and Ray wants to get the information for a step D.
Well, and I understand, and you're right. So the next question comes is, okay, now that we've defined why we do everything, the next question is, okay, so when I'm developing a budget, what does that look like? And you're right, what it might look like is when I look at police, because we've considered everything there a must other than solving property crimes, because a lot of people actually ignore property crimes and just take a report. We might say that these are all musts. In order to do these musts, it comes to $2.5 million in this fashion. And you're right, the budget category is police patrol, and the budget category is police administration, and the budget category is police records. And I can define you those. And I have,
Right.
year after year, and you as a council said, yeah, that makes sense in relationship to all the other requirements.
We can spend anywhere from 1 to 10 million on just that one category.
Correct, and staff comes back based on a level of service that the community seems comfortable with a cost. And we define that level of service loosely. I mean, we are not Sunnyvale, where they have a staff of, I believe, 4 in their performance measurement program defining, clocking somebody filling a pothole.
Yeah, no,
And I don't think we want to go there but I think we do want to spend some time, because it's one of the things that we have here, performance measure coordination. I would propose that we do it slightly differently than Sunnyvale does. But I think we want to spend some time doing that, and I think we want to look at that annually. And I would say that I may not budget for it as a program within the finance department, but when I come back with the finance budget, I can sit there and say, here's the amount of time we're going to spend on it this year. And if you don't want to spend that much time on it, then here's another choice that we can use that person for. So I think, but the first question is why do we want it? Do we even want to do performance measurement? And if so, why as a community do we want that? That's what I believe Mayor Lentz and Councilmember Richardson are just asking you tonight. What I'm asking is to spend more time on the things that are important for the council, is to tell me which one are those things you want me to really delve into, because you want to look at them annually. And I can come back and say, okay, let's really work at those numbers. And that seems to be that would be a good use of staff time. Because if you were to tell me, look at the pool, and I spend 15 hours looking at the pool, and you come back, well, that's not, we're going to fund that regardless because it affects 600,000 people a year. Then I'd spend 15 hours that I probably didn't need to spend, that I could have spent 15 hours better understanding PERS or better understanding, dealing with what's really going on at the pool as opposed to measuring the pool. Those are the kinds of conversations. And I think all of them are important. I think we can get to all of them. And as I said, if we look at, if you tell me which ones as a council you want to look at annually, we can start doing that work. And we have, because we've done some of that for Parks and Rec already.
Okay.
Yes.
But the problem I have with that just initially is that, even come back to police again, even, the must programs, we know we have to have police. And everyone agrees with that. And we're not going to be changing the police model every year, true. But every now and then, we may want to relook at, are we funding police appropriately? And now I think we're coming to the conclusion that maybe we don't have enough full-time police officers because there's a lot of overtime. And so maybe we want to do something about that. So that's not going to happen, that kind of question is not going to happen every year, but it's going to happen every now and then.
Correct.
So even with the must programs, there's going to be questions about, Seppi was talking about, different ways of doing it. Contracting out, blah, blah, and so forth, and that's one kind of set of questions. But those are pretty fundamental. But then once you decide, okay, we're going to do it in-house, we're going to have our own police department, then the question is, do we have enough personnel to meet the community needs, back to what you were saying, Cliff. And that's going to vary over time.
That's exactly.
And so we don't want to get caught into this idea, well, the only thing we're going to look at every year is whether we're going to have yard waste thing or not.
No, you're right.
We want to look at everything every year at different levels of intensity, depending upon whether we've just made a decision about something that's going to hold for a couple of years.
Correct. Okay, so, and you do look at everything every year through the budget.
But at least you eliminate looking at the city clerk.
Right, so.
That's what we then really start dealing with issues that are value to our community.
Right.
So one of the things that we were doing before we got into the 2011-12 process was we were looking at a department every year and delving into depth in that department and really doing full cost accounting for that department. We have looked at the water and sewer like that. We looked at parks and recreation like that. We looked at community development like that. So what we can do is those things that are on the must side and ongoing side, sorry, not the must side, but on the ongoing side, we can look at, okay, what's the rotation that council wants us to look at on those ongoing, on that in-depth? And say, okay, barring any unusual factors happening, that, year one we'll look at police, year two we'll look at fire, year three we'll look at this aspect of ongoing programs, year four we'll look at this, year five we'll look at that, year six we'll come back to the first set. So once every 5 years, all the ongoing things are looked at as a city, unless something significantly changes. And as Councilmember Conway says, probably for the next 4 years, we probably won't have anything significant changing financially. I'll keep my fingers crossed. So I think that gets to that idea. Then the ones that are annual, we can look at annually. The ones that are one-time will be brought to council on a one-time basis. Right. And that might bridge that where you're trying to get to with how do we review the budget on an ongoing basis. And I think it still leaves Mayor Lentz wondering, why do we, before I go to the supermarket, which is an analogy you had used, I want to look at my list and saying, okay, I want to buy steak this week because my family hasn't had steak in 6 weeks, and this week it's, we're having a anniversary celebration, or my child just made a major goal in her life, and this is her special dinner, and that's why I'm buying it this week. And that would be the definitional categories. And then the funding categories gets us to how do we go about doing that level of analysis that council needs in order to make decisions? Have I made a bridge?
You're getting there.
Close. Clay is sitting there and going, I don't know what he's doing standing up there.
You're getting close.
Well, let me ask you this, by the time if we do get there, Ray, it might be 10:30,
Yeah, no,
you know, and,
20 after 9.
could do it.
you know, I guess what the objective, you know, I mean, is reloading is looking at maybe loading up the funding category then versus, or
Sure.
dealing with the must as giving those.
I just wanna make
This
some
is
progress.
evolutionary and maybe it's not in their comfort zone, Ray. I mean, I think I understand where they want to go, and I kind of want to allow them to come up with whatever they're going to come up with, and it may not go anywhere. It may not, you know what I mean? But I don't know. It seems like we get to this point, and then we never get past it, and then,
Well, I think it's because I haven't been convinced yet that it's worth spending our time on it. I guess that's where I'm coming down from. It just seems to me that it's inefficient and not very useful. And so why should we spend time on something like that? So what I hear our finance director saying is that, well, maybe I can reconceptualize this so that we can do it in a way that everybody thinks it's worth spending their time on.
Correct.
And so my suggestion would be that we don't try to trudge through something that at this point I'm still very resistant to. And I think, I don't know, maybe some others are as well, but I certainly am. But I hear Stuart giving us a way out of that. And so my suggestion is that, okay, you know, work on a way out of it that is going to, from what you've heard, the different perspectives from the council here, and they are different, trying to figure out, okay, how do we bring this together in a way that works for everybody?
So,
And so I'm sort of thinking out loud in my head that, you know, maybe there are ways, once I've heard, you know, the way you articulated it, but we're not going to do that tonight, in my opinion. So I'm thinking that once we've had this discussion, it's clear that we are on different pages at this point, but maybe there are ways to, you know, bring it together. And if we can do that, that might be more effective use of our time.
Well, you know, I hear what you're saying, Ray. I mean, Stuart, if you think there is a way, then I'll go with it. I mean, I don't want to force, you know, a vote on this. I mean, I really don't. I mean, you know, you're pretty adamant that you don't want to go there. Mm-hmm. And though, I mean, I'll just share with you my frustration in, you know, that I think that we should. And I've tried to bring it back numerous times, and I'm trying to finish this thing before I end being the mayor. I mean,
Right.
to me, it's important. You know, if you know,
The issue is important,
You know,
absolutely.
running my own business. I mean, if I'm going to spend money on something, I got to know why I'm spending it first before I go out and start to price out the different T-shirts from the different distributors. You know, and so. If Stuart can come back with the way, and you even talked about it. I mean, you were already, you know, kind of there with some of your language.
Right.
And so,
I mean, I think I can bridge the two. But let me just make sure I can conceptualize.
absolutely,
this.
I want to, yeah, for sure.
Okay, so-
because he might not be what he comes back with. You might not be able.
Well, I mean, I can work with whichever any council members one-on-one to come up with something. So, you know, I'm very, you know me, I'm open to having conversations. So let me understand that what we're trying to do is we're trying to solve two different purposes, given the same set of information. So one purpose is to be able to respond to questions from the community as to why we do things. That's one question that we want to answer. Okay, so let me see if that's a true statement from all 5 council members. Because if that's a true statement, then the idea of the definition category makes some sense. We may not agree, okay, I'll take out of this.
Green and blue, but-
The council may not agree that the 3 categories are inclusive enough to define everything, and that may be, and then we might need to develop different, as staff, different categories as well, as they can be added to. But is it important that the programs that we provide have a reason that we can explain to the community that why we provide them? Okay.
Yes, are we good with that? I mean, I want to get some commitment.
Or a rationale for why we do things?
Yes.
Sure, of course.
Okay.
Okay. Now, the
But
next.
it has to be in those three categories is another matter.
And I understand that. And so maybe there needs to be additional categories.
Yeah.
And that could be, and that's fine. I mean,
Okay.
I'm not wed to three. I mean, as I started,
Yeah.
by the first time I did this, I was thinking categories 1, 2, and 3, and then we said, no, let's call them must, important, and valuable. Then I said, we can call them plaid, herringbone, and we can add to our pattern stuff.
Right.
You don't like herringbone? I'm sorry.
Can I make a comment before I forget it? I'm trying to keep notes on it, but perhaps in the important, I mean, I usually don't find myself thinking of ways to explain to a city resident why I funded something or why we aren't doing something, because I always feel that it's not, oh, well, we categorize it as important. It's usually very ad hoc. But perhaps if it makes you happy that we put a title on stuff with no funding, I can go along with that. And maybe to bridge the thought that we add to the important section that we're doing something because it is a moneymaker, and so that would be critical to the city being effective because we're preserving our assets. And maybe in that valuable, the important category, that it's to preserve
City assets.
city assets and revenue streams.
Okay.
I mean, adding to
A new
the,
category, I don't.
Well,
No, as the definition.
as a third bullet.
Because that's, affecting a broad spectrum, it's affecting the economic viability, and if that's the case, I could go through most of the smaller categories here and say, okay, well, that's valuable, it's not critical, so then it either has to be done by law to make us,
It's a must.
it's a must.
So then maybe what we should do is take off the term not critical to provide for the health and safety and just say things that are valuable add to the quality of the community, quality of life. So take off the second bullet on valuable, add a third bullet to important.
If those categories were, and granted, this doesn't mean we're funding anything or not funding anything, if it's just so that we can
Move
put
on.
it in a category and move on,
Or would it even be better if I don't have a category and I just use the bullet reason for it? Would that make it better?
I think
As opposed to calling something valuable to say it adds to the quality of
Mayor
life.
Lentz is looking for a category to specifically define it because that makes him happy to be defined.
No, it determines why we're doing it, not because it makes me happy.
The
So then I
sub-bullet
can
does.
tell people, yes, we're doing this because of these reasons.
Right, it's the sub-bullet,
Right, I
not
mean,
the, not
just
not
like
the
you would go to
category.
the store and say, I'm going to the store because I want to buy this, not because I'm going to the store because I have some money in my pocket.
That's usually why I
Okay, you're just not American.
Right, so I mean, I'm not going there with the budget, and I'd rather have us, have a plan.
Right, but so the question comes is,
before going
do
to
we
the
need
store.
valuable, important, and must, or would just having the sub-bullet be the reason? Makes sense. So that way you're not categorizing, you're putting the reason for the bullet there.
But the title was supposed
Jeez,
to capture what.
I mean, do we have to really?
It was.
Do we
I'm
have
just-
to go
I'm
that
just-
route?
I'm just
I
wondering,
just think that if it's a financial gain, then, I mean, if it's to preserve the assets of the city.
I
It's
like the
important.
definition. No, I
Right.
think we should add that to the
Yes.
def.
well, I think,
okay,
I think that if
that's fine.
that
You could
helps
add another
narrow
bullet
it
that
down
adds to the
to
financial
why
aspect.
it's something that, I mean,
Okay.
it's probably still, at that point, it's a must thing to do, is to dredge the,
well,
I think that it's,
given that, I mean, just kind of going back to the history and, from what Ray said, I mean, if we use that, is originally when we started out to do the marina, it wasn't supposed to make money. It was supposed to be a valuable thing that the community wanted it. You know what I mean? It wasn't
Supposed to attract business to Sierra
attract
Point.
businesses, yeah, not to make money directly, but it
Right.
ends up making money directly. And so now we want to retain that asset. And that asset really is valuable because it is critical to the effective and efficient operation of the city because it brings revenue in. So in a sense,
Already gone.
It's gone from
we're
valuable to
answering
important.
that, yeah.
It's moved categories. It's moved from a valuable category to an important category.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
we've had, yeah, you know, we've
Yeah,
had
so it's evolved.
discussions.
I mean, so in that sense, it's kind of evolved.
evolved.
That's why, you know, it goes back to this being a living document on, you know, because things change, we are fluid, and so it's, you know, we're.
But I don't mind
we're-
adding it, though, if that helps you to get there. You know, even
Well,
though,
I
you know,
think
Clark
it
is
takes
kind of
some of
already.
the subjectiveness out of it. It's still going to be very subjective. I mean, is this something that you want us to all agree on every category that, ooh, it's important to me, vote on
You
it?
know, I mean, I've said that, you know,
all to agree, you have
yeah, you know, in the past, you know, when we talked about this, I said, you know, there might be something that we don't agree to, right? But if you get 3 people saying, I think this is important, over 2 people that say it's valuable, then it becomes important. And then you just move on
For the
to
moment.
next one.
Until council changes, then it becomes valuable.
Well, you know, that's right.
As
Like Mark said.
Councilmember Conway said, it becomes a living document. Okay, so if that's one reason and we can get there. The second reason that we're trying to go through this process is to try and figure out how do we look at funding existing programs and how do we look at funding new programs. I mean, that's the second reason for doing a budget. If that's the case, does the idea of looking at what are we calling ongoing things that we're going to look at periodically versus what are the annual things that we're going to look at annually versus the idea of looking at one-time expenditures as they arise? Does that make sense to the council?
It makes sense if we had a very consistent budget. But, and while we might be in a consistent budget period, it doesn't make a lot of sense when we're in flux or when there's a big change.
Correct. Yeah, and that's the reason we went from a 2-year budget to a 1-year budget, because we, you know, council and staff recognize that we are in a period of flux, and therefore looking at it from a 2-year basis did not make much sense, because we did want to take a critical eye to everything that was in the budget for those years. I believe that for the next 4 years, we're in a period of stability. So this may be a good time for us to try it out, to say, here's the things that are ongoing, and we're going to figure out what's the order that we're going to look at those things in over the next 4 to 5 years. And then here's the things that we want to spend time with annually, because those things that are annually are always in flux, and those things that are ongoing are much more consistent from year to year. And that may be the definition. What are, you know, what can be changed easily year to year, and what do you want to have as a consistent program year to year? And if that's, I mean, I'm just trying to figure out what's the sense of the 5 members in front of me.
You know, I think you've already asked us, you know, are we comfortable with asking why we're, you know, the definition category. So we're good with that. And we know that it isn't tied to any, you know, funding decisions as far as, you know, in the budget. It's a tool, though, to help us understand the things that we're providing to the community, which ultimately then...
And if something else comes new to the council, we would then say, put it back into a category and saying, yeah, this is a must, or this is an important, or this is a valuable for these reasons.
Yes.
So that way we have, it becomes, as you say, a living document as we change, because the budget isn't static. Budget programs, you know, we do change things during the budget periodically. I mean, it seems very stable, but if I went back and looked at the 2001 budget and compared it to the 2010 budget, I bet I can find 30 or 40 things that we don't do anymore and 30 or 40 things that we probably do now. So, and I think that keeps it as a living document, and so the process for getting there, and there may be different processes for getting us to the definitional category, but I also want to see if I've got Ray's perspective on the number side. And I know it's not just Ray, because I also know, Councilmember O'Connell, that you too have the same kind of issue, as does Councilmember Richardson. And I'm not discounting Councilmember Lentz and Councilmember Conway in it.
All right.
And whatever future council may we come in.
Here comes the dance.
Right, but I think it's a lot, I think,
You better stop.
well, what I think it is, I think Councilmember Miller is driving this aspect of the conversation. And I hear that.
I appreciate the positive that you're saying about Councilmember Miller driving it, because it's driving me crazy. But let's go.
But I also understand that I'm trying to balance
I wanna move
5 different
forward.
ideas.
Yeah.
And the question is, do I have that right idea, that if we define things that are annual and define things that are ongoing, look at ongoing on a periodic basis, knowing that unless, given no major change in circumstances, that makes sense. Annually, we'll look at certain things because that makes sense. And then one time we'll look at them because they're one time and we have to look at them.
That makes sense to me.
What I appreciate through discussions really, when we start going through
Almost
this
10 o'clock, Beth, you
process,
can go home anytime.
it's going to make the budget really absolutely fantastic. With your detailed or conceptual understanding with this or that, I think it's going to make the budget a lot more meaningful.
Yeah, give us a foundation, right? So we can get to where you want to be, man.
Yes. I mean, what you said so far, sounds okay, but we still have this problem that the programs listed here are not the budget categories.
Correct.
We know that.
That's the big problem.
But my impression is.
And I
most of
can't
the-
think about it unless I
Right.
see
Most of
dollars and
the-
cents somewhere.
Most of the things that you would call annual, I'll bet you are budget programs, very specifically defined. Those things that you would say are ongoing are probably the ones that are more mushy in the budget. That's just my guess, because I think most of the things that you're going to look at on an annual basis, I bet I can point to in here. And although I haven't defined, a lot of them are defined in the budget. And yeah, I can define them better if I know that that's what you want me to do going forward. Up until this point, that hasn't been the question that has been asked of staff. If you're going to tell me you want to look at cost of service analysis on an ongoing basis, I can pull that out of a person's time and say, here's how much time we spend on it. Because that's easy. But if you tell me you want to know how much time we spend on billing, I'm going to have to pull 5 or 6 different people's times throughout the organization, and that would be nearly impossible. But my guess is you want me to do billing on an ongoing basis, and you want me to do cost of service analysis on a one-time basis, on an annual basis.
In that example, yeah, sure.
So, but that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking if you told me what your annuals one are and your ongoings, I bet you it pretty much mirrors a lot of what you see in the budget. That is my guess.
Ray, let's have a leap of faith.
Well,
Okay, go beyond this thing that is really right now. You're not there. Let's go to the next step.
would
that's what
would
I
council
was
want me to work?
Thank
Would
you.
council give me
That's what I was
permission to work
proposing.
one-on-one
Yes.
with Councilmember Miller to go
Yes.
through the budget just to see if I can get there, and then any other council member? I know Councilmember Miller has the interest, and any other council member. I would take the time to go through the budget and see, is this an annual thing or is this and then come back to the whole council and say, here's my understanding of what the new information is. And then my other suggestion would be that if everybody sent me how they would define these programs given the new definitions, I can compile that for the council and bring that back at a meeting in December. So we can meet council member.
That's something we've already done, but no one contributed to it.
I understand, but I think there's an agreement that we can do that now. And if I can do that before Councilmember Lentz leaves his term of office in December, that would make, I could check that off of my
Yes.
to-do list.
Make him happy.
But this is not about just mayor.
No, no,
It's not
no.
about.
We both been working on it.
It's not
Okay,
about
okay,
him
okay,
trying to
okay.
do this before the office. This is.
It's
has
about
nothing
getting a
to do
better
with-
budget process.
Exactly.
Right. And,
Yeah, we're
and,
trying to do it in a timely manner, too.
I
and,
don't like
and,
this
you know, I mean, we
pressure
have
that
a subcommittee,
mayor
I know,
finished it.
if I could.
Well, he said it, so that's why.
I just
I
threw it
didn't
out there
correct
as
him. I
a,
didn't
as
jump on
a,
it,
you
but
know,
no.
Well, the subcommittee, I know, has been working on this, and we've struggled with it. You know,
Right.
we've struggled mightily with it, and we really haven't gotten too far. And I'm comfortable with Stuart's suggestion, but I'm also comfortable with moving forward, but I want to move forward as a body, you know? And, you know, because I think I'm getting a just, you know, and Ray, I certainly understand, you know, your issue. But at the same time, I want to really kind of give them a chance of where they're going with it too, as our subcommittee, you know, and I know they put a lot of work in it, and I don't want to just, you know, jerk the rug out, because if we can't get to where you really want from here to here, then, you know, it's either we stop or we say,
But I
well,
think we can.
yeah,
I think we can.
You know, Ray, I'll just let you know, man, when we had the subcommittee, when we were first starting, we were dealing exactly with the same concerns that you were. Exactly the same. We were talking about the dollars, you know, we, you know, and eventually we came around to the criteria. But it took some time. And,
yeah, and you guys are the ones that developed it. And so I mean, it
Yeah.
does, and I think I'm at that point now where, okay, I get it. And I certainly understand what you're saying. And Terry, you know, I think just in the sake of moving on, you're probably ready to move on.
yeah, but, you know, I do think having the one-on-one with Stuart, you know, would be helpful. And just kind of,
But, you know, as you know,
Like we've
as
been
staff, I don't
talking
want to
about.
say I'm only going to do one-on-one with Councilmember Miller. If other council members have an interest as well.
Of course.
So we all
Do you
have,
want to do one-on-one with him?
To
Just
go,
curiosity.
to go through the budget and go through the categories and say which things are ongoing, which
Oh,
things
to
are annual.
educate him.
no, and
No,
and
for him
also
to,
talk about.
for him to educate me
the-
as to how he sees it. And so that way I could bring back to council.
You want to make.
I'm fine, whatever it
Okay.
is to get our colleague.
comfortable.
Okay,
Comfortable,
good.
yes.
Well, then, you know, then I think we moved in a positive direction.
I think so.
We'll say baby steps, you know, I mean, we're taking steps in, but it's progress, and I think that's what.
Yeah,
what we-
you know,
what we
Stuart,
want.
you know, thank you for putting together this presentation and, you know, having you know, that strong desire to make our budget as clear and as relatively as easy as possible to understand, not just for us, but, you know, for anybody that eventually is going to want to take a look at how we spend the city's money. So, and also, you know, the rest of your colleagues as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart.
We
Okay,
all agree with that.
Yeah,
all right. So, you know, before we adjourn, I sent you guys well, do we have any, did anybody want to talk about some of their subcommittees that they've been a part
I just
of?
wanted to say something about Samtrans, yes.
Okay,
I definitely, the efforts that the public has made is paying off, definitely. And the efforts that the staff and our subcommittee, Clark and myself have been, is helping out. To such an extent that Samtrans did not expect to have 500 comments from people. They did not expect that. This was definitely on the chopping block. Now they're considering is to come up with options. And we think it's going into the right direction, and I really like to thank Clark for attending that meeting on the November 14th. I heard you did a fabulous, eloquent job.
The mayor was there too?
yeah, Cliff was there.
You were there too?
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
Cliff was
both of
there.
you, I appreciate that very much. I know we were
Anya
doing.
Miller and also Nancy Loxamana.
Right.
That was remarkable because behind the scene, there was a lot of work that was going on, a lot of campaigning was going on. So just wanted to let the public know that really everybody's effort has moved this giant thing forward. And hopefully tomorrow when we're meeting, we would be able to have some understanding of the direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great.
It's good.
Yeah, and thank you, Caroline, for providing that information for
Yes,
us to
thank
reach out to the folks that are on the board, because that was really helpful.
Very much so. Oh, I don't have my microphone on, but
All right, any others?
let me repeat the whole thing now.
Well, heck, we still got another 40 minutes.
No,
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't. You know, there is one thing I do want to mention. There was an email that was sent out from the Council of Cities regarding Kevin Mullen stepping down from the MTC
Since you're
board.
not an attorney, no.
And so I sent you guys an email saying that I would like to put my name in the hat for that. So just kind of putting that out there that I'll be.
I just share
When
something
is the
that
meeting, when the decision is made? It's the city selection committee, right?
this month.
December.
Aren't you on that board?
Yeah, I am, but no, not on MTC, but I would share something that one of the council, Alicia Aguirre from Redwood City has done, is interested. Jerry Deal, that has a lot of experience in transportation and regional involvement, has done. I understand Rich Garbarino is interested, which I don't think it would be the right thing. And I'm not trying to discourage you.
There's a lot of competition.
But what I'm saying is the involvement in the regional activities, I don't want you to step in and reel in the lion's den, because that's what's going to happen. And if you had a good chance, I would push for it and I would say go for it. At the same time, I really think there might be some uphill battle.
Yeah.
So that's the one that I just wanted to bring it up. But I have already spoken to Jerry Deal. He's talked and he's pushing for this Sam Trans and so forth, and I've agreed to help him. But if my colleague wants to go for it, we go as a board. We don't go as a separation, but I really want you to really think very carefully about this. This is not a small seat.
Yeah.
Very involvement. I've seen the discussions that are taking place behind the scene.
No,
Just
thank
to
you
let
for
you
that.
know.
Yeah. I will definitely consider that, though I do think that the position is important for our city. And, but you're right, it is going to be an uphill
Yeah,
battle.
with all my involvement, I didn't put because I was asked to do it, and I
I'll look at the
didn't,
council.
because I knew, it's not going to. But
All right, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, good.
it's all in the agenda.